Welcome everybody to the Astro Pillars podcast, The Bridge of Life. This is a little podcast dedicated to the biochemist George W. Carey on his work on the Zodiac and Souls of Salvation. It's titled The Bridge of Life because we're just going to look at his concept of what that means in terms of administering the salts to help cultivate the self for our own healthcare and our own maintenance, which is the most important thing. I practice Chinese medicine, so I use a lot of herbal medicine, but I'm really fascinated by these salts, and I use them as a backup for people who, you get the occasional person who really can't stomach herbs. Sometimes when they're extremely deficient, can be a little bit harsh on the stomach, and these salts are an absolutely essential to understand, and particularly in relation to astrological diagnosis from a birth natal chart. But I just want to give a basic idea about these for people who don't know too much about them. And we can see this is the cover of one of his books called The Zodiac and the Souls of Salvation. And we can see how the 12 mineral salts relate to the 12 signs of the Zodiac. And each sun sign relates to a particular salt. For instance, Aries relates to Kali Phos, Taurus, Natrium Sulf, Gemini, Kali Myrrh, Cancer, Calcium Fluoride, Leo, Magnesium Phosphate, Virgo, Kali Sulf, Libra, Natrium Phosphate, or Nat Phos, Scorpio, Calcium Sulf, Silica. Sagittarius relates to Silica. Capricorn relates to Calcium Phosphate. Aquarius, Natrium Myrrh, and Pisces relates to Ferrum Phos and iron. And it's really important to get a good understanding of these, because so many people, when they come into my clinic, will ask me so many questions, or what can I do in my own time, or what's the best way to nurture and cultivate and my health in terms of what the Chinese would call yang shen. Excuse me, a concept called, which translates to nourishing life. How can we nourish our own life to fulfill our destiny, so to speak? And I find having a good understanding of these salts is incredible, because, well, they're homeopathic, so they're very easy to administer. They absorb quick right into the blood. The inorganic substance absorbs straight into the blood. If you know, in Australia now, homeopathy is completely under attack from the media, but it's a subject for a different time. But understanding this stuff and understanding astrology, because astrology is really important, I think, to understand the deeper side of ourselves. It's like a map of our psyche, so it's going to give us some great insight to our shadow side of the psyche, and also and those shadow aspects can also be not necessarily negative and hidden, buried kind of rage or tendencies like this. The shadow side can actually also be our hidden talents. Why aren't we living our potential? And I find the salts really help cultivate this. It keeps our body at a certain frequency, a certain vibration that makes us immune to certain kind of energies that can cause us harm from other people and also in the environment as well. Now, and this is all based on Dr. George W. Carey, who was a biochemist. And I found, reading a lot of his works, that really resonated with what the ancient Taoists were actually really talking about as well, even though they didn't name specific salts. But herbs do have certain minerals and substances. And in Taoism and in Chinese medicine, which you don't learn in our contemporary education, used to use a lot of essential oils, and they used to use a lot of stone medicine as well, that is crystal. And the Taoists would use a lot of elixirs and would put stones into water and drink them. They would wear stones, they'd tape stones to certain points as well, depending on the quality and the nature of the substance. And that's also related to alchemy, and the cell salts are really related to alchemy. It's a transmutation, a transformational process. If we look at the process of digestion in our Western medical system, digestion is actually a process of alchemy. You're transforming something to turn it into something else, to produce some kind of mineral substances that nourish and sustain your life. And to me, that's alchemy. And that's one of the real wonders of the human body. Now, what does George W. Carey mean? I mean, he was a biochemist. What does he mean by biochemistry? Well, biochemistry means that the chemistry of life, or the union of inorganic and organic substances whereby new compounds are formed. So in relation to so-called disease, this system uses inorganic salts known as the cell salts or tissue builders. The constituent parts of man's body are perfect principles, namely oxygen, hydrogen, carbon, lime, iron, potash, soda, silica, magnesia, etc. So when these minerals become deficient, we have disease. The same thing in Chinese medicine. Chinese medicine, we're always looking to balance out an excess or deficiency, reading from the pulse. It can be either one. And so necessarily we don't need to know the actual real disease in, say, a scientific medical term in Chinese medicine. We can just read the pulse and go, okay, so how can we harmonize this? And most of the time we do it and bring it into balance. The disease or the discomfort someone's suffering from, that being physical, psychological as well. As the Taoists say, all diseases are rooted in the spirit. Usually the person becomes healthy and back in balance. And this is the same thing with the salts. So what does George W. Carey mean by when he's talking about disease? He goes on to say that a shadow cannot be removed by chemicals, neither can disease be removed by poison. There is nothing, no thing, to be removed in either case, but there is a deficiency to be supplied. The shadow may be removed by supplying light to space covered by the shadow meaning the deficiencies. So the human body is a receptacle or a storage battery, and will always run well while the chemicals are present in the proper quantity and combination. So the chemicals he's talking about are the salts. The cell salts are found in our food and are thus carried in the blood, where they carry on the process of life. He also goes on to say that when a deficiency occurs in any of these workers through a known assimilation of food, poor action of the liver or digestive process, demineralization of the body commences. So disease is a deficiency or in some of the chemical constituents that carry on the chemistry of life and not an entity. So when we look at disease, we realize that, which he says, having learned that disease is not a thing but a condition due to the lack of some inorganic constituent of the blood, it follows naturally that the proper method or cure is to supply the blood with what is lacking. In treatment of disease, the use of anything, not a constituent of the blood, is unnecessary. So what he's saying is these salts feed the blood. And this is very similar to herbal medicine as well. When the blood is diseased or there's disease in the blood, it's very hard to clear. these salts instantly, on absorption, enter the bloodstream. So the salts are broken into 5 categories or 5 groups, and the biggest groups of salts are the calcium group by far. Now we've got to bear in mind too, I get this question all the time clinically, elderly people always talk about calcium, or when women are going through menopause, the calcium really starts getting depleted. But they're taking this and this supplement, that supplement, nothing's working. We've just got to remember that calcium, you need to be doing weight-bearing exercises to absorb it. Otherwise, it just won't absorb. And this is the same thing in the concept of Jing. Now, Jing in Chinese medicine is life essence. It manifests in the bones. And to build Jing, we do this through Tai Chi, Qi Gong, these weight-bearing exercises. It's an actual medical fact that Tai Chi, even though they're trying to discredit it in the scientific community, that it does really nothing for your health, like everything else that's good for you, right? But it's an actual fact that Tai Chi, they did studies on this. I don't have the study at the moment, actually. I'll have to try and dig it up so I can put some links below. But they did, and it's a fact that Tai Chi generates the most bone density out of all exercises. So it's fantastic for geriatric medicine. And it's fantastic for anyone at any age, but particularly geriatrics. If you're suffering osteoporosis, in combination with taking calcium supplements, or calc fleur or calc phos in the salts, it's important to do this weight-bearing exercises. So homeopath usually, probably the biggest single remedies of homeopathy use are the calcium group in the cell salts. So the 5 or 6 groups we've got are the calcium group, which is calc fleur, calc phos, calcium sulfate. We've got the sodium groups, natmer, natphos, natsulf, and then we've got the kali group, kalimer, kaliphos, kalisulf, the magnesium for magphos, and ferrum, iron, and of course silica. So sodium, potassium, and calcium are in 9 of the 12 remedies. Sulfur is in 3 remedies. So, George W. Carey talks a lot about the wonders and possibilities of the human body, and one of the main reasons I got interested in his work was because I was doing a lot of astrology research, and I came across his work when I was researching a lot of astrological correlations in the Bible. And because when we're looking at the Bible, I guess on an esoteric level, we're talking, there's really a lot of talk from the words and terms and the combinations of words and where the root words actually come from. There's a lot of references to the body, because the body is the temple, not the church down the road. So if you keep it clean, hygienic, then you're going to have the potential to experience what George W. Carey would call the God self, or what the Taoists would call the imperial self. Someone living in selfhood, who's got adequate self-esteem, and who can govern themselves and govern their own life. This is what's really lacking in society today. But he actually says, it says that all roads lead to Rome. And boy, do they all do when you do your homework on a lot of subjects. But particularly, he's saying this, modern science discovered that all roads of real knowledge lead to the human body. This is real science, not the science we've got going on today. This is back then, in the 1900s, that didn't have, the big corporations funding them. The human body is an epitome of the universe. When man turns the mighty searchings of reason and investigation with what he has so long used without. So as above, so below, so to speak. What's in man is reflected outside. And we've got to look, people, when we look at astrology, it's like it's not the planets up there affecting us. They're archetypes and they reflect in. All planets reflect light. And he goes on to say that while it is true that flesh is made up by the precipitation of blood, it is not true that blood is made from food. The inorganic or cell salts contained in food are set free by the process of combustion or digestion. This is what I was talking about when I was saying alchemy. And carried into the circulation through delicate absorbent tubes of the mucous membranes in the stomach and intestines. That is air, spirit, breathed into the lungs, enters the arteries, air carriers, and chemically unites the mineral base, and by wonderful transformation creates flesh, bone, nails, and all the fluids in the body. Now this is the same thing the ancient Chinese are talking about when they're talking about qi. And now you see a lot of minor, lately in Chinese medical literature, modern so-called scholars are trying to discredit the concept of qi and say that this is not what they meant. Well, this is what they meant. They're talking about air, qi and blood. They're the same kind of thing. You need the same chemical components of both to create the minerals, the supplements. They're going to substitute the body. This is why Qigong breathing exercises were so important. Space is considered nutrition. It's a fact. The Taoists talk about this a lot. They're on this subject. They knew this a long, long time ago. And for some reason, modern medicine still hasn't got it. But maybe one day they will. Who knows? But it's really, really important. This is what I found incredibly fascinating by his descriptions of this work. And if we move along here, which was meant to be the topic of what I was talking about, George W. Carey talks about the bridge of life. And the bridge of life is considered, we're in the female laboratory for 9 months. So we're in the womb for 9, and then we fall 3 months fall short of 3 months to make up the full circle, the soul year. And so those 3 months are the bridge that constitute the bridge of life. So if we're born in Gemini, then we've got a Gemini sun. We need Kali Mer. And then the next month's Cancer, so we need calcium fluoride. And the next one we need magnesium phosphate. They're going to be some of the 3 key minerals that are going to balance your constitution, because you were lacking, you weren't in the womb in those 3 months to get fed those minerals. So when we come across and cut across the bridge, this is what we need. This is what's going to make us holistic and whole. There's a few other ways we can do this. This is one example of using the salts. Obviously, when someone comes in for diagnosis, you're going to do your diagnosis, face recognition, and things like this. Most salts are administered by facial diagnosis. And obviously a few other things like intuition and sharp clinical and analytical skills. But also another way is doing a birth natal chart, which is actually really important because there's a number of planetary configurations, particularly the planet Saturn is probably one of the most important, because we've got to remember Saturn's the great inhibitor. So whatever sign Saturn's in our chart is usually one of the minerals we're going to need most, because we're going to be lacking in that. And that's all I just really wanted to say about this. We're going to do a little more subjects coming up, particularly on Yang Shen, which I'm going to talk about with another colleague of mine. We're going to get on board and talk a lot more about health cultivation through exercise and diet therapy, particularly Chinese dietetics, and also a few other astrological components will come in. I think I will do a few more and expand a bit more on George W. Carey's book. Get maybe a little more into the esoteric words and terms of what he was proposing, what makes up that God man, the divine man.